Goodbye. Yes, they're already waving. Koen Malfait and Bert Deseine. Thank you for joining all, everyone. Much appreciated from our end. And Koen and Bert will give a real world example of how you can make STEM learning more compelling. Next slide, please, Rosie. Well, a bit of background on the organizations we represent, just to give you a start to get to know us if you don't know us already. Like we saw on the previous slide, I'm the representative of ReadSpeaker in this particular case. And at ReadSpeaker, we've been in business since 1999 as a developer of text-to-speech technology. We not only develop the technology, but we create solutions that make use of this technology in order to improve accessibility and improve digital engagement for all kinds of e-environments, including e-learning and e-assessment environments. And nowadays we serve a wide customer base in a very, very large geographical area in various industries. Now we haven't posted these numbers to to brag or to boast about them, but they're merely there to indicate that we have a wide track record and indeed a long experience in the fields of e-accessibility and e-inclusion, which we're happy to share. And that's the reason why we have this webinar today. So that's it from ReadSpeaker's end. I'd like to give the floor to Brett. Next slide, please, Rosie, so he can introduce Moodle.
So my name is Brett Dalton. I'm the head of educational services at Moodle. So that I'm one of the heads of product effectively. So the Moodle is the largest LMS and most widely used LMS in the world. So it's a learning management system, also known as a virtual learning environment, or VLE, in other parts of the world. Moodle's been around for about 20 years, and we've been really making a big effort as part of that to make sure that we're inclusive and accessible for all our users, including multilingual and also different abilities. So we've got about 163,000 registered sites. Because Moodle is open source, people can download it, install it, and they can choose to register with us. So we know there's actually many more sites out there than the ones that we have registered. There's about 416 million active users at the moment, and that's growing every day. So we're really excited to be here to share this webinar and to share how we can some of the tools that we have can actually help you author accessible content better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brett. And taking into account that Brett is indeed situated all the way in Australia, thank you very much for freeing up the time. So, well, either late in the evening or maybe even very, very early in the morning on your end. So thank you for that, Brett. Now, handing over to Bert and Koen from the Flemish STEM Olympiad for a quick introduction. Gentlemen.
Right. Hello, everyone. We are Koen and Bert from the Flemish STEM Olympiad, or the Vlaamse STEM Olympiade, as shown in the image. We are a non-profitable organization initiated by the Vives University of Applied Science in Belgium. And our aim is to encourage Flemish children to choose for STEM competences, that is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, where our focus is in technology and engineering. Now, how do we implement Moodle and ReadSpeaker? We will talk about that a bit later on.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Bert and Koen, of course. And yes, so what are we going to talk about today? Well, the topic being how to make STEM more inclusive, more accessible, or STEM e-learning in particularly. We will start off this presentation today with diving into some of the challenges that are faced today inside or in the field of STEM e-learning. And after touching upon these challenges, it becomes important, and we will touch on more on the importance of designing for accessibility and inclusion. One of the ways to do so is indeed to add text-to-speech technology, which we'll introduce, and I'll talk about the benefits for a bit. But there's more you can do, and this is where Brett from Moodle jumps in order to show you and give you a bit more background on how you can use Moodle in order to allow for more accessible design. And just like Bert and Koen just mentioned, they will give a real-world example of how the Flemish STEM Olympiad has indeed upped their game inside of their e-learning, their e-assessments on STEM to make it more accessible, more inclusive and engaging. At the end, we'll have a Q&A session, so questions and answers. So at any point of the presentation, if you have a question, do not hesitate. Open the chat, type in your question, feel free to ask us anything. STEM e-learning and accessibility related, of course. And I don't know the meaning of life, so I cannot explain or answer that question for you. But anything, feel free to put it in the chat. Rosie will indeed, make sure to monitor the questions. If they're easy, she can answer them right away. Otherwise, she'll save them and make sure that we answer as many questions as possible during the Q&A session at the end. Next slide, please. Now, when I was preparing this webinar or my slides for this particular webinar, I immediately had to think of this particular quote by the late Steve Jobs, the former founder of Apple Computing. And the actual quote is way longer than just its snippets. But Steve Jobs mentioned that design isn't what something looks like or how it feels like. No, design is about how something works. And this really touches upon the very essence of today's webinar. So I like to start with this particular inspirational quote, just to show you that design is about how something works. Next slide, please, Rosie. So looking into the challenges in STEM e-learning nowadays. Well, a recent literary study has gone through a large number of previous studies or academic research on STEM learning. And as you can see, there's a download link at the bottom. So if you, want to have a copy of the handouts afterwards, not a problem. If you want to read the full article, simply click the link. It'll take you to the open database where you can actually find the article and download it for free. Now, this literary study took a large number of academic research and academic publications on STEM learning and aggregated the challenges found across all these studies and categorized them. And they also indeed categorized summarized the recommendations coming from all this research they've gone through. Particularly for today's topic, very interesting and very relevant are the two challenges found on how to actively engage students in STEM learning and how to accurately assess their knowledge of STEM. Next slide, please, Rosie. Furthermore, this study indeed also categorized and summarized recommendations they found across all these STEM learning researches performed. And this is a very overly simplification conclusion in order to, we didn't want to avoid, put all the recommendations on the slide, but these are the most noteworthy ones, the most important ones for today's topic. They found across many of these studies the recommendations to make sure that you create a learning environment that is both accessible and inclusive to a wide range of diversity and diverse needs among students. They recommend to make sure that you recognize and act upon this diversity amongst these students, because if you pay attention to that, you will make sure to have a positive effect on students' perception on STEM learning. Now, when I thought about these 3 points, immediately a specific cartoon jumped to my mind. It's been going around for quite some years now, and it really perfectly depicts these recommendations. As you can see in the cartoon, it's a teacher who wants to fairly assess with one generic exercise, assess the quality of his students. And his students are a very large variety of different animals. And the challenge or the exam is very simple: climb the tree. Well, of course, as you can see, the bird and the monkey will have no issue whatsoever to succeed. But especially the fish and the seal in the back, they will have no chance of succeeding this particular assignment. their diversity is not taken into account, and they will not succeed, which will have a negative perception on this particular challenge for them. So this perfectly visualizes that paying attention to inclusivity, paying attention to the wide diversity amongst your students will indeed have a positive effect on their perception of STEM learning and, of course, their participation in STEM learning. Next slide, please. So this shows why it's important to design for accessibility and inclusion, because still nowadays, a large group, up to 20% of students, struggle to participate. And if we boil it down to what kind of barriers certain people, certain students, certain learners face, it comes down to a very wide variety. For instance, non-native learners, which takes into account people's linguistical background. You might grow up speaking your first language, your native language, and then all of a sudden you might move to a different country or start to study at a higher educational institution, and all of a sudden you have to learn and participate in e-learning in a different language. For instance, English. If that's not your first language, that will indeed impose a language barrier for you as a non-native learner. Secondly, more commonly known, those learners who face neurodiversity challenges. Most well-known neurodiversity challenge is, of course, dyslexia, the disability that inhibits you to read or to easily read text consumed by reading. Other neurodiversity challenges can be autism, concentrational disorders like ADHD, and similar other neurodiversity challenges. Now, the third and fourth group, they kind of intermixed, but nowadays a lot more students actually engage in e-learning from their cell phone, from a handheld device. There's one big problem with these. It's a small screen device. So actively engaging with your e-learning or your STEM e-learning by reading from a small screen device is, of course, not the most optimal way of learning. And very, very many occasions they engage while they're on the go. For instance, in the train, either to college or back from school, back home. A lot of noise in the background, a lot of distraction. So focusing on what you're reading in your e-learning might not be optimal. And a very large group that a lot of people do not directly take into consideration is simply those learners who have an auditory preference, who simply do not like to participate in e-learning by reading, but might prefer to listen. At a recent event where I did a live presentation for an audience, and the audience was about 60 people there, I did a little brain exercise. And you can do this, you can participate in this from home. I asked the audience to think of a topic of their own personal interest and then decide for yourself, and the audience had to raise hands, whether or not they would want to prefer to read a book on that particular topic or to listen to a podcast on that particular topic. Well, during that presentation, 15 to 20 people indeed raised their hands on preferring to read a book. The remainder, so 30 to 35 people, indeed raised their hands on preferring to listen to a podcast. And that's also one of the very important things. If you design for inclusion, make sure that you include all those different user groups, different preferences. And of course, last but definitely not least, those learners with a visual impairment, with either low or no vision. Make sure that they can indeed participate in learning as well. Next slide, please. So now that we've seen these challenges and these recommendations from academic publications on what type of learners might be or are present in that wide diversity of learners, how can we design to overcome these challenges? Well, at ReadSpeaker, we recommend to make sure to add a different format besides text. And that includes audio. Rose. If you allow learners to put on a headset, you allow them to engage in a different mode, not a visual mode, but an auditory mode. Next slide, please. And you can easily do so with the text-to-speech technology that we at ReadSpeaker create. Text-to-speech technology can instantaneously and just, in one simple click, automatically in a split second, convert any written text within STEM e-learning into listenable audio. It uses AI-powered voices to create that audio, and it's available in a wide range of languages and even a multitude of voices in order to reflect different age or gender categories, and to make sure that the learner, the student, is actually comfortable with the voice they're listening to. You can integrate it, and definitely more important, you can customize the pronunciation, which of course especially is important for STEM if you are reading out formula and similarities like that within STEM material. Next slide, please. Because if you do add text-to-speech technology, you don't add technology, you don't design for what it looks like. No, you design for how it works because you have a listen option. And by allowing learners to listen, you can reduce that language barrier for those who all of a sudden have to learn, participate in a different language. Because the first step in acquiring or mastering a new language is learning how to listen to that language. And of course, those neurodivergent students who face challenges like dyslexia, they'll help them overcome their challenges, and it helps overcome those with disabilities like visual impairments, overcome their challenges as well. It simply levels the playing field by providing a choice. You empower the learner by giving them the choice themselves. Do I want to read? Do I want to listen? Or do I want to read along while listening as well? It's shown to increase engagement and concentration. This isn't something we came up with. No. On the next slide, we will show indeed how ReadSpeaker participated in an academic study together with the University of Barcelona. It's performed and executed at the University of Barcelona. It's on voice-supported reading or reading while using text-to-speech technology. And very nicely in this study, it was performed within the Moodle LMS, where the ReadSpeaker plugin was used. And results indeed indicate that not only is there indeed, they've shown that there's a widespread existence of reading difficulties among these students at a university level, but results also confirm that being able to use text-to-speech technology helps minimize these issues or these problems with reading. And the actual factual numbers coming from this particular study. And again, there's a download link, so if you want to read the full article, let us know. But this study showed that 20% of these students, and take into account, this is the University of Barcelona, so these are predominantly Spanish students. When they had to read in their native language, Spanish, 1 out of 5 students, 20%, scored higher on concentration and comprehension. But when looked or dove or researched, when they had to consume course material in English, which is not their native language, that number jumped from 20% to 65%. So 2 out of every 3 students at the University of Barcelona indeed scored higher on concentration while reading and understanding the text they were reading by being able to listen to the text as well. Now, these are, of course, very powerful numbers that indicate why indeed designing for inclusivity isn't just important, but also why it's effective. Next slide, please. Now, besides adding text-to-speech technology, there's more tips, there's more you can do, there's more you can consider when you are indeed designing STEM e-learning. Now, I'd like to give the floor to Brett Dalton from Moodle to tell you more about it from Moodle's perspective. Brett.
Thanks, Jarno. So when we're talking about accessibility, inclusivity for design, excuse me, it's very late here. There's really 3 core requirements you need to think about. One is the platform itself, and I'll talk a little bit about how Moodle is accessible and why the efforts we go to around that. Then the platform tools actually are accessible to you to make sure that content can be used with ReadSpeaker or other screen readers and other accessibility tools. So it's more than just voice to text. There are other tools that need the content to be correctly marked up as well. Then also, what is the content you're delivering and how are you delivering it? Because being inclusive and being accessible is not just about having the right content, but how can your students actually access that? And we'll go through each of these as we go through the next few slides. Next slide, please. So Moodle is built with accessibility in mind. Basically, when we're designing any new functionality, or as we're going through a process of refining existing functionality, accessibility of that functionality is a non-negotiable for us. So when we go through the QA process or when we go through the design process, that is always one of the first things that is up front. And I'll show an example of how Moodle has progressed over the years to what it is now and why. We're audited annually around our certificate of compliance for the WCAG standard. Again, this is something we do regularly because we want to make sure that all of our users have peace of mind knowing that they can actually have a accessible system. And it's not just about having screen reader support or having tools that allow you to tag things properly. It's also about the way that the system is laid out. The distractions and UI elements can be hidden or turned off. We've got accessibility on mobiles, on mobile as well as mobile app. So the mobile apps actually are screen reader compatible. And then we have proper multilingual support. And I'll talk a little bit about that as we go through as well. So next slide. So here is what Moodle used to look like. This is Moodle 2 point something from memory. But it might give you an idea of like how busy a learning management system might be for a student. You know, we've got a navigation pane down one side with a whole bunch of news and events and upcoming things on the right hand side, and the content they're actually meant to be concentrating on in the middle here. And there are a lot of other elements that are very much like this right now. So as we look at the more modern version of Moodle, which is actually our last release, so if we go to the next slide, where we can see that, you can see here we've got the content front and center, but we still have that navigation pane, but it can be hidden for the student. And we still have all those blocks, but again, they can optionally hide them if they don't want to see them. So the students can concentrate on just what's in front of them. It also means that all that content's out of the way with a screen reader. You can also just go down to like showing the content from one section. And you can see here, we've also got that audio content sitting up front there for the students to be able to access straight away. So this is really allowing students to focus on what they need to do and what they want to do, getting rid of a lot of those distractions. The other thing that you might notice here is the icons have been de-emphasized. So it's a little bit hard to see in the screen recording, but the color palette that we've chosen is accessible for the 4 major variations of color blindness, but they're also not big, strong icons, and that's intentional because we don't want to draw the student's eye away from the content itself. So this is part of our design philosophy, the way that we think about it. The last thing, which is a little bit subtle, but you may not be aware immediately when you look at the screen, but you'll notice there's a large amount of white space on either side. Now, accessibility requirements really do talk about not making your content too wide. And many people think, oh, I've got a big screen, I want to make it as wide as possible. Some processing issues can actually mean that if a line of text is too wide, and even non-neurodiverse people have problems with this, if the line of text is too wide, then it's very hard to track that. It's slow to read and you can lose your place very easily. So again, Moodle intentionally limits the width of the content to be compliant with accessibility guidelines and to make it easier for our instructors to design accessible content. So if we can go to the next slide, and this is a short video showing some of the tools that we actually have. So in this demonstration, I'm actually going to come in here and we're going to create a text and media area, which is just a bit of text on the front page. But it's mostly so we can show a couple of examples of things we might be doing while we're creating some STEM type content. So the first thing here you'll see here is we're going to actually add an image. This is just a banner at the top of the page. It's mostly just pretties. Quickly drag and drop in the image. But one of the things you'll notice here is that the editor doesn't allow you to save a non-accessible image. So we might want to enter some text in the bottom there as a description, but in this case, it's just a decorative image. So we're marking that as decorative, and the screen reader will just skip over it. But otherwise, we can put some text in there to actually explain what this image is. The second thing that you might want to do, and again, very common tool that you'd be using in the sort of STEM area, will be creating a table. So tables can be very tricky for a screen reader to understand. So in this case, we're just creating a little table that's got the day, the location, and time that my classes might be occurring in. But as the screen reader goes through the table, it doesn't know how to reference what the different cells and the contents are. So what we're doing here is going into the properties, and we're actually marking that first row as this is the header. So now it knows when it's reading the table out, as the user navigates from cell to cell, using a keyboard, for example, or screen reader is going through, it can correctly announce what those are. And thirdly, of course, we're going to want to use mathematical formulas. So these are the sort of things that you would use on a daily basis. Now, Moodle has MathJax built into it, which is a really quite powerful formula editor. And here we're just going to take, it's a LaTeX format. So those who are familiar with it, and here is the quadratic equation, and we're going to save that, and that's going to insert that into our page. Now, once we display this, you'll actually see that formula displayed correctly. But MathJax has some really great tools. So firstly, mousing over it will actually make that formula bigger and easier to read, so low vision users can get to it. But you can also configure that formula with some specific accessible options. So you can turn on the accessibility mass language markup, which will aid a screen reader in announcing it correctly. In fact, you can even tell it whether you want to read it verbosely or you want to read it briefly. You can also set the foreground and background colors, because you may have a background image behind that, so you can make it the contrast acceptable. And lastly, you can actually set the language. So as we talked about, some of this content might be multilingual. Something as simple as the decimal separator in Australia and America is different as in some regions of Europe. So if you don't set the language correctly, it may be reading something out as thousands rather than dots. So the last thing here we're showing very briefly is the accessibility checker. So built into the editor, it's telling me, I run the accessibility checker, it's telling me my table doesn't have a caption. Now in this case, it's just a suggestion because it's not mandatory. But if there's other errors, like I haven't given a description to an image, or I haven't given a table a header, it'll actually tell me that. And then as an instructor, I can go through and fix that and make sure my content is accessible. Next slide, please, Rosie. So the last thing to consider is inclusivity is more than just accessibility. It's not more than just catering for disability. So being inclusive includes things like economic circumstances. And we've already talked about the language and the different information processing, but economic circumstances are one that very rarely gets consideration. So your students who come from lower socioeconomic backgrounds may not have access to things like a laptop or a computer on a regular basis. So how can we help that? Providing alternative formats, and this is good for everyone. This is good for people who have issues accessing reliable internet. It's good for people who have vision issues. It can be very good for people who are studying on the go. It can be very good for people who have keyboard accessibility issues. When you create those formats, so something like an audio format, it's always good to include those alternate formats at the top of your content, not at the bottom. Frequently you see big chunk of text and then, oh, there's an audio recording down the bottom of that. The user has already had to navigate through all that content before they've got to that. So if you look at a lot of government websites, you'll notice that they always put that audio at the top. One of the things to keep in mind with ReadSpeaker is you can actually create a screen reader version of your content. You can actually export that out as an MP3. Something I found when I was playing with one of the demos the other day, which I thought was really great. Creating audio content can actually be very tedious. This is a very quick way to be able to do that. Considering the usability on a mobile device, a lot of students who are from low socioeconomic backgrounds may be working as well as studying. So this might, then, in their travel time might be the only time they get to work. Or as I said, they may not have regular access to a desktop computer. So keeping that in mind, building it around mobile devices can be very helpful. Moodle has a mobile app available out of the box, and it actually works offline as well. So a lot of the content can be loaded to the device and watched offline. So that can be very important. The last one, as was mentioned earlier, multilingual content. Now, in Moodle, the system can be set up for a particular language. You can set a particular course to a particular language, or, as quite often is the case, you might need to mark a section of text in a particular language. So most of the course is in English, but this piece of text might be in Spanish. That's important for several reasons, as we talked about in STEM, to be able to make sure things like decimal separators are announced correctly, but also pronunciation and particular technical terms sound very, very different in different languages. So being able to mark a section of text, and you can do that in the text editor as well, as a particular language, will actually increase the accessibility of your content quite greatly. So when you are designing your content, it's great to keep these things in mind. There's many, many more things we could be doing, but my time is short, and I will hand back to Jarno for the next part of the presentation.
Thank you very much, Brett, and thank you very much for this very clear outline of the possibilities within Moodle to would be designed for accessibility and, more importantly, for inclusivity as well. Now, from this, we've talked about challenges, we've talked about text-to-speech as a solution and other options within the Moodle platform, recommendations Brett just gave. What does a real-world example actually teaches us? How can you actually apply all of this within STEM e-learning? Now, for this, I want to give the floor to Koen and Bert from Vives University of Applied Sciences, the driving forces behind the Flemish STEM Olympiad, to give you an overview of their real-world experience with this. Bert, Koen, the floor is all yours.
Okay, thank you. You can go to the next slide. So, as you already told, we will deal with the Vlaamse STEM Olympiade, or the Flemish STEM Olympiade. Flanders is the upper part of Belgium, so the Dutch-speaking part of Belgium. And in here, we have already for decades quite a big number of Olympiads held for children up to ages of 16, 17, 18. So dealing with mathematics, dealing with all kinds of science, with astronomy, with languages. So we have a French Olympiad, we have a Latin Olympiad. And there was nothing with regards to technology up to 12, 13 years ago. So this Vlaamse STEM Olympiade aims at young children, making them interested in all STEM-related issues in order to have an impact on their study choice. So to guide them towards STEM jobs in their future, because we need a lot of them. So we host 4 competitions. So we have the Flemish STEM Olympiad for juniors, so that's for ages 10 to 12. We have the same for the youth version, which is dealing with children from 12 to 14. We also have a STEM tournament for the juniors and for the youth. So if you want to find something back on our Olympiad, you can always check the website. Of course, it will be in Dutch, as we are from the Dutch-speaking part. You can go to the next slide, Rosie. So here you see on the left and on the right are publicity banners for this year's Olympiad. We are financially supported by the Flemish government, and we are also supported by almost all Flemish higher education institutes. So Vives University of Applied Sciences has been mentioned before, but we also are supported by KU Leuven, for instance, by all kinds of universities of sciences in Flanders. We are merely the organizers, but they all are backing us up. We're also supported by approximately 10 industrial and governmental partners, such as our Department of Defense, but also the railway organization in Belgium, and so on. So you see a lot of logos on the bottom of our two papers, so that these are our partners. We have quite an important outreach. So if you imagine Flanders has a population of about 6 million people, we reach 60,000 children. So that's 1% of the entire population. Not 1% of the children of those ages, of course, but I think we reach more than 20% of the children in Flanders at that age. So we had 26,000 participants in the junior edition, 34,000 in the youth edition. This year we reach also over 1,000 teachers. So the teachers can also participate. They get the same questionnaire as the children. And for the practical tournaments, we also have more than 100 teams from both age groups that do a real STEM. They really have to make something. Next slide, Rosie. So each of the Olympiads, the youth and the junior version, consists of 2 rounds. So we have first a selection round, which is an online questionnaire. So that's what we actually are talking about in this seminar, with a focus on 8 technology fields: chemistry, mechanics, electricity, electronics. And you can read the rest: computer technology, biotechnology, construction technology, and also technical drawing skills. So from that competition, where 30,000 approximately participate in this first round for each of both Olympiads, we select the children, the 64 children with the best results, and they come to the final round, which is held at the Ministry of Education in Brussels. Again, there they receive a set of theoretical questions, but also 4 lab exercises. And in that final, a lot of prizes are to be won. On the left side, for instance, you see on the image, you see an image of the first round where they are now using the Moodle platform with ReadSpeaker support to answer a question about programming. I think it was this one. And on the right bottom, you see a girl doing one of these lab exercises in the final. Next slide, Rosie. So, as mentioned, Moodle and ReadSpeaker are involved in the first round. The children did in the past, so we started this 12, 13 years ago, I guess, received the booklet. They still receive that booklet because we have these industrial and educational partners, and we want the children to take a book home so that the parents also see it. But until a few years ago, all these kids had to write their answers on paper by checking boxes. And then in the next weeks, 20,000, 30,000 papers arrived here at Vives, and we had to scan all these papers, run it through a software package that doesn't recognize the check boxes all the time. So we had a lot of silly, stupid work to do before we could select our finalists. So now, by using this online questionnaire by Moodle, it's more easy for us. More than that, we can randomize the questions. We can randomize the multiple choice answers, and the correction is done automatically. So that's a big benefit. The children cannot just look next to their neighbor and check the same box as the one next to them did. In addition, with ReadSpeaker, we have this extra support for children with concentration problems, dyslexia, and also with children that have a slightly different background and do use Dutch as their second language. So we allow in schools that the children have in-ears to go through the exam. So next slide. So I will give the word to Bert now, because he was doing most of the input of our questions in the Moodle environment. So he can explain this a little better than I do.
Okay, so practically, how does this look for us and how does this look for the users? This is going to be visible in the next slides. So for us, we do the input in Moodle, and it looks like the screen you see now. On the left side, you see a question 22. We put in the text and the figures, and on the right side, also some other questions, some technical drawing. We put in some question and some answers. So we do this for the 32 questions on the 8 domains we have. Next slide, please. Afterwards, we test it. We test the 32 questions because there may not be faults in it. So we test it internally, constantly, through the team we have. And one of the things we test is the speaker software. So each question should be text-to-speech and should be pronounced correct. For some examples, that's not the case in the first part. And you see here a print screen of things that are not speaked out correctly, and which then we ask to Jarno to pronounce it correctly, which is also done very quickly. Thank you for that, Jarno. And after that, we go through it again and it again, so there are no faults at the final stage. Next slide, please. What is the result? What do the people see or the students see? That's a screenshot for that. This is the first question, a question about electricity, where you see lamps, a switch, and a battery, and you see 4 possible answers. Now, the first line of the question is selected, and when students do that, they get the option text-to-speech. It's the first one, lees voor in Dutch, but it's text-to-speech. When they click on it, the text-to-speech software is activated, and the student listens to what the sentence says. On the right side, you see the 32 questions, so the student can navigate between it and the attempt if he or she is ready. All right, next slide, please. All right, that was it from our side. Jarno, back to you.
Thank you very much, Bert. Thank you very much, Koen, for that really good real-world example of how you at the Flemish STEM Olympiad really designed for inclusivity from the very get-go. Now, this brings us to the end of the actual presentation, and I'd like to ask Rosie to read out some of the questions we received, so we can start answering some of the questions you've sent in. So, Rosie, floor is yours, and feel free to click the word to the next slide. And if people still have a question, just type it in the chat right now. We'll see if we can answer as many as possible.
Yeah, thank you, Jarno, and thanks guys for all of that information. It's insightful. It's good to know more about everything that you guys do with the STEM. So let me just bring up some questions we've had on some of our other channels. So first question, probably for yourself, Jarno, is somebody's asked, why is it so important for text to be accessible to STEM students in particular?
Good question. Well, of course, this doesn't just count for STEM in particular. It counts for everything, for all e-learning. And text should be, well, if the text contains the message, whether that's a question in something like the Flemish STEM Olympiad, or whether that's the learning content, then everyone, well, has the right for having access to that particular content. In order to participate, they need to be able to read or to understand what they are reading. So all learners, everyone, well, that's the beauty of being human. We're all different. And some of the differences are not visible from the outside. So if someone does have dyslexia and has trouble reading, or if someone has a visual impairment and has trouble seeing the text, or if someone has a non-native background and has trouble understanding the language they have to read, well, then it becomes important why it's necessary to make sure that there's an alternative format and why it's important for the text to be accessible. So I hope that answers the questions. Perhaps Brett or Bert and Koen, if you have a perspective on that from your ends.
No, we have nothing to add. No.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Jarno.
Let's go to the next question.
Yeah, another one that's come in here. I think, Brett, that somebody's asked, how does Moodle include accessibility in the design process?
So when we start looking at a new interface or a new piece of functionality, there's a couple of key things that we make sure that we do as we go through the process. So when we start looking at how you navigate the UI, we always look at the tab order to make sure that a keyboard navigation makes sense. And that's tested as we go through the development process. It's tested at the end as well. We make sure that for things like we've just introduced a new ordering type question into Moodle in the last version. So that's now part of core. It used to be a plugin, but now it's part of core. So you can actually say, well, I want my students to ask a question. I say, what's the order of importance of these 5 things? And they have to take them, they have to drag and drop them up and down. When we design that piece of functionality, or when we reviewed that piece of functionality, we had to make sure that there was a way that you could do that via a keyboard. There's also a new requirement. So accessibility is always a moving target. It's always, as technology evolves, new requirements come in. So we currently have a certificate of compliance for WCAG 2.1. The 2.2 standard was released in October, so just after we started our audit. So unfortunately, we couldn't include the 2.2 standard, but with that, we'll be in our next one. But as part of that, there is requirements around dragging and dropping. So you must be able to not have to hold the mouse button down and drag, because not everyone can hold a mouse button down effectively, because they might have mobility problems in their hand. So when we went through that process of reviewing that piece of functionality, we had to make sure that you could do it via a keyboard, or you could do it through click and then click where you want it to go. And again, make sure the screen reader was actually reading these things in a way that made sense to the user, and they could actually. So they're the things that we look for. And of course, we do some basic testing around contrast and font sizes and target click areas. All of these things get checked. And then even after we've done all the manual work, we also have an automated system that actually runs over the pages to make sure there's not anything we haven't missed gets checked. We catch anything that we haven't checked manually. So.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Brett. That was quite a good description. So thank you for that. We've got another question come in here. Jarno, I think it's sort of going back to one of your earlier slides about the different kinds of learners that text-to-speech can help. It says, how easy is it to introduce the text-to-speech technology to different kinds of learners, such as neurodivergent or non-native learners, non-native language learners, apologies.
Yeah. I can answer that from 2 perspectives. So technically and from a user experience kind of perspective. First of all, from the technical perspective, so how you as an institution can introduce this to your learners. Well, ReadSpeaker's text-to-speech is available as a plugin to a wide variety of platforms, of LMSs, of VLEs, or learn experience platforms, or even e-assessment platforms. In many occasions, it's already integrated, and you only have to activate the integration. So it's very straightforward. It's very low barrier to add from a technical point of view to offer to your learners. Now, from the learner perspective, so the user experience, all they have to do is click and listen. So the listen button itself is added to the environment, and they don't have to click it. It's not mandatory. but it's optional. Like I said in one of my slides, you empower the learner by offering that choice to them and for them to decide themselves whether or not they want to listen or read, or both at the same time. From a user experience, buttons there. All they have to do is click it, and within a split second, automatically the text is read out loud to them through our text-to-speech technology. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Jarno.
And maybe to add to that, come to think of it, if people want to try that particular experience themselves, it's not a problem. Simply reach out to us. We supply free of charge trial accounts or sandboxed accounts so that you can, experience it yourself. Have your students experience it and see what their feedback is.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jarno. Another one that I've collected here from our socials. It's for Koen and Bert. I think it's to do with the kind of tests that are involved. So it says, what tests do the finalists do at the final of the STEM Olympiad? And I guess if I could add on a slight bit to that is, and how does the tools that we've been talking about fit into those tests?
Well, the tools do not fit into these tests. The tests are merely lab exercises that we do for groups of. We have 64 finalists, so we divide them into 4 groups of 16, and then they do some real technology. So they have an experiment on chemistry, for instance, where they have to look for a murderer by doing blood test samples. They have to program a robot to follow a certain path or to do some electricity experiments where they use switches to put lights on and so on. So we mainly use the technology in our first round, not in the final. Yeah.
Okay, great. That's good to know. Thanks, Bert. I think we've got time for one last question. So let's see here. We have one that says, someone's asked, as an institution, we teach our digital material in 3 languages. Can we use the audio, I guess they mean from the text to speech, in 1 language, or is it possible to have it in all 3 languages? I think probably Jarno.
Yeah, yes. So the text to speech is available in, I thought on the slide it said 70 languages. So in a very wide variety of different languages, we can speech enable the content. And even in the case that the content itself might only be available in 1 language, we also have a translation option directly in our, for instance, in our Moodle plugin available that allows learners to translate into perhaps their native language, and then allow them to listen to it in their native language as well. So again, a question I can answer from 2 different angles. Yes, we can speech enable in multiple languages. Brett's a perfect example on how to mark up multilingual content is indeed very much in line with this. If you have the same kind of content available, already translated yourself in 3 different languages, simply mark it up. Language A, let's assume English, French, German, or something else, or Swedish, or Icelandic. Simply mark it up, label it as being available in these languages. If marked up properly, the ReadSpeaker listen functionality or listen button will directly use the appropriate voice accompanied by that particular language. Secondly, if you only have content in 1 specific language and you want to allow learners to read it in a different language or listen to it in a different language, then the user, the student itself, can simply select, translate into a different language, and listen to that different language through the ReadSpeaker plugin.
Great. Okay, thanks, Jarno. I think that
Not a
explains
problem.
that one. Good explanation, thank you. And that's about all we have time for today on this webinar. So thank you all very much for joining us from all over the world. It's great to know that we have so many attendees with us from various places today. And we will be in touch with to share the slides with you all shortly. So thank you and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Brett. Thank you, Koen. Thank you, Bert, for joining today. Deepest gratitude for joining us. And of course, thank you to the audience from my end as well. If anyone still had a question that's not answered, reach out to us. We'll make sure that we provide an answer afterwards as well. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.